The word was already out before Margot heard herself say it. "You're a menace, Elena. You know that? A menace and a mommy, in equal parts." She meant it the way she meant most things at 9:40 on a Friday night. Loosely, exhausted, with no filter left between her brain and her mouth. She was still looking at the red line on her screen, not at Elena, when she said it. She didn't even register it as a sentence worth remembering. Then the office went quiet in a way that offices don't usually go quiet. Elena's fingers stopped over the keyboard. Not slowed, stopped, mid-word, the cursor blinking alone in an unfinished sentence. Margot looked up because the silence had a texture to it, a pressure, like the air before a storm changes the light in a room. Elena was not laughing. Elena's face had gone warm, not embarrassed, warm, not the flustered pink of an awkward joke landing wrong, but something slower, something that climbed from her collarbones up into her cheeks like she was deciding in real time whether to let it show. She did not look away. "Say it again," Elena said. Her voice was quiet. It wasn't a joke voice. It wasn't the voice she used to deflect Margot's terrible one-liners about depositions and difficult clients, the voice that usually came with an eye roll built in. This voice had no eye roll in it at all. Margot's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The building was empty. She knew it was empty the way you know a house is empty when you've lived in it long enough. Through the quality of the silence, through the specific absence of the cleaning crew's vacuum 2 floors down, through the way the elevator hadn't dinged in over an hour. It was just the two of them, the glow of Elena's monitor, the half-drunk coffee gone cold in the blue mug that lived permanently on the corner of Elena's desk, filled every morning without being asked, exactly the way Margot liked it. Too strong, no sugar, splash of oat milk. Margot had never once wondered why Elena knew that without being told. She was wondering now. "Elena, you don't have to." Elena's hands came back to the keyboard, but she didn't type. She just rested them there, like she needed something to hold on to that wasn't the 8 feet of carpet between their desks. "Forget I said that. It's late. We're both tired. Ignore me." Margot did not ignore her. That was the problem. She sat there in the after-hours quiet of a law office in downtown Denver, 42 years old, divorced for 6 of those years and steel-plated for most of them, and she felt something crack open in her chest that she had spent a very long time keeping welded shut. She did not say it again. Not that night. But she would think about not saying it, and about the 8 feet of carpet, and about the color climbing Elena's throat, for a very long time after the lights went off. If this is the kind of story that gets under your skin a little, the ones where nobody says the whole truth out loud until it's almost too late, you should know this isn't the only one like it. There's a version of this show that lives outside YouTube entirely. Original stories, longer, unfiltered, the ones too much for this platform to carry. That's what the Patreon is for. The link's in the description and pinned in the first comment if you want in. Now, back to that office, and the 8 feet of carpet neither of them mentioned again for 3 weeks. To understand why one careless word could do that much damage, you have to go back further than that Friday night. You have to go back to the beginning of what Elena Reyes had been doing, patiently, for 2 years and 4 months, without ever once naming it, even to herself. Voss and Marchetti occupied the 3rd floor of a renovated warehouse in Lodo. Exposed brick and steel beams dressed up with glass partition walls. The kind of office that photographed well for the firm's website, and froze in January no matter how many times facilities promised to fix the radiators. Margot Voss had built the real estate practice from nothing. 11 years of acquisitions, zoning fights, and commercial leases that she negotiated like she was diffusing something that might still go off in her hands. She had made partner at 34. She had made her name a fixture on the letterhead at 38, the year her marriage ended, the year she decided that the firm would be the thing she poured herself into instead. Because the firm, unlike a husband, could not decide one day that it had married the wrong kind of ambitious. Elena had come to the firm as a temp, filling in for a maternity leave that was supposed to last 12 weeks. That was 3 years ago. She had never left, because within a month, Margot had looked up from a closing binder at 11 at night and realized that Elena Reyes had already anticipated every document she was about to ask for, had already flagged the clause that would have blown up the deal, had already ordered the food Margot hadn't remembered she needed to eat. Margot noticed competence first. She was good at noticing competence. It was the only currency she fully trusted. She noticed, more slowly, over the following 2 years, other things. The exact 15 seconds Elena waited before knocking on her office door when Margot was on a call that was going badly, giving her the choice to wave her in or not. The way Elena's calendar invites always left a 20-minute buffer before difficult client meetings, unrequested, unremarked upon, simply there when Margot needed a breath she hadn't known to ask for. The fact that in 3 years, Elena had never once forgotten how Margot took her coffee, not even the week Margot switched from sugar to honey and back again, out of some brief and forgotten health kick. Margot filed all of it under the heading of the best assistant I have ever had, and did not look any closer, because looking closer was not a thing Margot Voss allowed herself to do with people who worked for her. There was a wall for that. She had built it deliberately, brick by brick, in the ruins of a marriage where she had loved someone who ultimately resented every hour the firm took from him. She was not going to make that mistake again in a form that also happened to be her employee, 12 years younger, and entirely too observant for anyone's good. Elena, for her part, noticed everything about that wall, and had spent 2 years and 4 months quietly, methodically, without a single dramatic gesture, finding the places where the mortar was thinnest. She was not naive about what she was doing. She was aware, in the analytical part of her mind, that made her excellent at her job, that anticipating someone's needs before they voice them is a form of intimacy that can be mistaken for professionalism indefinitely, mistaken by everyone, including, eventually, the person doing the anticipating, if she isn't careful. Elena had been careful, she told herself. On the night she stayed late for no reason that had anything to do with billable work, that she was simply good at her job. She told herself that on the day she memorized which conference room had the good chairs, so she could book it whenever Margot had a long negotiation ahead of her. She told herself that on the day, 8 months into the job, when she realized she had started dressing slightly better on days she knew Margot had client meetings, and told herself it was for the clients. She had stopped believing her own explanations sometime around year 2. She had not stopped doing the things that required them. What she had not planned, what no amount of quiet, patient calendar management could have accounted for, was the way Margot would look, that particular Friday, saying a stupid word she didn't mean anything by, and the way something in Elena's chest would simply refuse for once to stay quiet about it. She had not meant to say it again. It had come out the way the truth does sometimes, faster than the part of you built to filter it. The Monday after was the worst kind of ordinary. Margot arrived at 7, as she always did, and found her coffee already on her desk, exactly right, as it always was, and could not look at the mug for a full 10 seconds before she made herself pick it up. Elena greeted her with the same even, professional good morning she used every day, gave her the same rundown of the day's calendar, and did not, in any observable way, acknowledge that 3 days earlier she had asked her boss to say something again in a voice that had nothing professional in it at all. Margot told herself this was good. This was what competence looked like. This was 2 adults choosing, correctly, to let something inconvenient pass without turning it into a catastrophe. She told herself this every day for the following 3 weeks, with decreasing conviction. She noticed, the way she had trained herself over a decade to notice small operational details, that Elena had started closing her office door with slightly more force than necessary. She noticed that Elena had stopped bringing in the second cup of coffee around 3 that she used to bring without being asked. A small habit that had quietly disappeared, the way habits disappear when the person doing them decides the gesture has started meaning something they're not ready to have meant. She noticed that when she said goodnight, Elena's goodnight came back a half second too fast. like it had been sitting ready in her mouth the whole time, waiting for the chance to end the conversation before it could become anything else. Margot Voss, who cross-examined opposing counsel for a living, who had spent 11 years reading rooms full of people who did not want to tell her the truth, could not make herself read the room 8 feet from her own desk. It took Priya Anand, senior associate, and the only person at the firm who Margot trusted enough to be annoyed at her, to say it out loud. "You've been in a mood for 3 weeks, Priya said, dropping a file on Margot's desk with the particular thud of someone who had been waiting for the right moment. "And Elena's been in a mood for 3 weeks, and you're both terrible liars about it in completely different directions. What happened?" "Nothing happened." "Margot, I've watched you deconstruct a hostile witness in 4 questions. Don't you dare tell me nothing happened." Margot did not tell her what happened, but she thought, for the first time in 3 weeks, about the 8 feet of carpet, and the particular quality of the silence, and the way she had gone home that night and sat in her car in the parking garage for 11 minutes before she trusted herself to drive. The thing about walls built out of a decade of careful self-protection is that they don't fall all at once. They develop a crack, and the crack sits there, structurally sound-looking from the outside, and everyone inside the house keeps living as if nothing has changed, right up until the day the whole thing simply gives. For Margot and Elena, the day the wall gave arrived disguised as a business trip. The firm had spent 4 months negotiating the acquisition of a boutique ski resort property outside Aspen, 300 acres, a hospitality group with cold feet, a due diligence period with 100 moving pieces, and a closing deadline that Carla Bianchi, the firm's most senior partner and the person Margot answered to when she answered to anyone, had made clear could not slip. The deal needed someone in Aspen for 4 days to walk the property with the surveyor, review the title work in person, and sit across from a seller's attorney known for burying problems in appendices nobody read. Margot needed her lead paralegal there. She needed someone who could organize 4 days of shifting logistics without dropping a single thread. On a Tuesday afternoon, when Margot mentioned, half to herself, that she needed to figure out who could go with her, Elena said, without looking up from her screen, "I already blocked the flights. Thursday morning out, Sunday night back. I can have the property file organized by tomorrow." Margot looked at her for a second too long. "You already blocked the flights." "You were going to need someone. I figured it'd save time." Elena's voice was perfectly even. "Unless you wanted Teddy to go instead?" Teddy Okafor was a paralegal with excellent instincts for zoning ordinances and absolutely no gift for reading a room, the kind of person who would have narrated the entire flight with facts about airline safety statistics. Margot did not want Teddy to go instead. She was fairly sure, in a part of her mind she was not yet examining closely, that some portion of her had known that before Elena finished the sentence. "No," Margot said. "You're right. It should be you." She did not let herself think in that moment about how convenient it was that Elena had already blocked the flights before Margot had said a single word about needing someone. She filed it, the way she filed everything inconvenient, under the heading of Elena is good at her job, and did not look any closer. Aspen in early October was the kind of beautiful that made you angry at yourself for not being able to enjoy it properly. The aspens themselves were turning, gold against the dark green of the pines. The whole valley lit up like something out of a tourism commercial, and Margot spent the first 2 days barely looking at any of it, buried in title reports in a rented office space with bad Wi-Fi and a seller's attorney who kept finding new ways to make simple things complicated. Elena, in the meantime, was doing what Elena did, running 4 days of shifting logistics with a calm precision that made the whole operation feel less like a crisis and more like a schedule that simply happened to include problems. She rebooked a surveyor appointment around a snow delay without being asked. She found, at 9 at night, a 24-hour copy service willing to print 600 pages of appendices on short notice. She did all of it in the same even voice she'd used for 3 years, and Margot watched her do it with a feeling that had started sometime in the last month, to sit less comfortably in the category of professional admiration. The third night, the seller's attorney canceled the next morning's walkthrough, citing a family emergency, and handed them, unexpectedly, an evening with nothing scheduled in it. Margot found herself standing on the small balcony of the rented condo the firm had put them up in, looking out at a valley going dark blue in the last light. When Elena came out with 2 glasses of wine she hadn't been asked to pour and set one down on the railing beside her without a word. "You don't have to keep doing that," Margot said, meaning the wine, meaning 3 years of anticipating things she hadn't asked for, meaning something larger she wasn't ready to name. "I know," Elena said. "I want to." The valley was quiet in the particular way mountain towns get quiet at altitude, sound traveling differently, the air thin and cold enough that Margot could see her own breath. She was aware, with an intensity that felt almost unbearable, of the 11 inches of space between her shoulder and Elena's, of the exact temperature of the wind, of the fact that neither of them had moved toward the door in almost 10 minutes. "Elena." Margot's voice came out rougher than she meant it to. "That night in the office. I've thought about it every day since." "I know." Elena didn't look at her. She was looking at the mountains. Her jaw set in a way that made Margot understand, for the first time, that this composure Elena wore like a second skin was costing her something. "I think about it every day, too. I've thought about a lot of things every day for 2 years, Margot." The wine glass in Margot's hand went very still. "What does that mean?" Elena turned to look at her then, and there was something in her face that Margot had never seen before. Not the calm competence, not the careful professional warmth, but something raw, something that had clearly been sitting behind the composure for a very long time, waiting for permission it had never been given. "It means I didn't book those flights on Tuesday because I figured it'd save time." Elena's voice had gone quiet and steady and terrifyingly honest. "It means I've spent 2 years making sure I was the person in the room when you needed someone, and I told myself it was because I'm good at my job, and I am good at my job, but that's not..." She stopped. Started again. "I need you to know that before anything else happens here. Because if it happens and you find out later that none of it was accidental, I don't want you to feel like I lied to you. I want you to know now. Before you decide anything." Margot's heart was doing something complicated in her chest, something between panic and a relief so large it frightened her. "Before I decide what?" Elena's hand found hers on the railing, cold fingers against cold fingers, and neither of them pulled away. "Whether I get to say it a third time," Elena said, "or whether this ends here, in Aspen, and we go back to Denver and pretend none of it happened. The way we pretended for 3 weeks. Margot looked at her. Really looked. The way she hadn't let herself look in 3 weeks. In 3 years. And saw, all at once, the 20-minute buffers before hard meetings. The coffee made exactly right without being asked. The door closed a little too hard. The good night that came back too fast. She saw 2 years of patient, careful, deliberate care, disguised so thoroughly as competence that she had never once had to be brave enough to name what it actually was. She was the one who moved first. The kiss was slow and careful, and entirely unlike the wall Margot had spent a decade building, and somewhere in the middle of it she understood, with the sudden vertigo of realizing you've been reading a book upside down, that she had gotten the entire situation wrong from the beginning. She had thought, for 3 weeks, that she was the one who had lost control that Friday night, that a careless word had cracked something open by accident, and she'd spent every day since trying to figure out how to seal it back up. She understood now, standing on a balcony in Aspen, with Elena's hands cold in hers, that nothing about this had ever been an accident on Elena's side. The word had been an accident. Everything that made the word land the way it did, 2 years of quiet, patient architecture, had not been. She pulled back, breathless, and found herself laughing, a short, disbelieving sound. "You've been planning this." "I wouldn't call it planning." Elena's mouth curved, some of the raw fear in her face giving way to something lighter. I'd call it waiting. Patiently. For a very long time. You blocked flights for a business trip you knew I'd need someone on. I blocked flights for a business trip where I knew, statistically, given 4 days in a hotel with one balcony, that something was eventually going to happen if I was patient enough to let it. Elena tilted her head. I'm an excellent assistant, Margot. Did you think that only applied to closing binders? If you're the kind of person who likes discovering, right along with the main character, that you've had the whole story backwards the entire time, that's the exact feeling the Patreon stories lean into hardest. The ones that go further than this platform allows. The ones where nothing gets softened for a general audience. Links in the description, pinned in the first comment. What happens after that balcony in Aspen isn't the end of this one, though. It's where the real complications start. Denver did not stay simple for long. They came back from Aspen on Sunday night having agreed, in the careful language of two people who had both spent years protecting themselves from exactly this kind of risk, that they would take it slowly, that they would keep it entirely private for now, that the firm's small size and the reporting line between them made this something that could end both of their careers if it went wrong or became visible before either of them was ready. Margot, in particular, had spent 11 years building a reputation for exactly the kind of judgment that this situation would call into question the moment anyone found out. She was a partner. Elena was her direct report. It did not matter, in the eyes of firm policy or professional gossip, that nothing about the dynamic between them looked anything like the kind of predatory imbalance that policy existed to prevent. It would look like exactly that to anyone who wanted it to. For 6 weeks, it worked, in the fragile way that secrets work when both people involved are good at their jobs and better at compartmentalizing. They were careful. They did not linger in doorways. They did not eat lunch together more often than they used to. Elena kept making the coffee exactly right, and Margot kept pretending, in front of everyone but Elena, that this was simply the ordinary rhythm of an excellent professional relationship. Priya Anand was not fooled for more than about 4 days, though she had the good grace not to say anything until Margot brought it up herself, late on a Thursday. The two of them alone in Margot's office with the door closed and a bottle of decent scotch that lived in the bottom drawer for exactly this kind of conversation. I need you to not make this weird, Margot said. I've known you for 9 years. I have never once made anything weird that wasn't already weird to begin with. Priya poured 2 fingers into each glass. You look happy, Margot. I don't think I've seen that in a while. I'm not going to lecture you about it. There's a reporting line. There is. Priya didn't flinch from it. There's also a version of this where you two are careful and smart and it works out fine, and a version where it doesn't, and either way, the thing that actually matters is whether you're being honest with each other about the risk you're both taking. Are you? Margot thought about the balcony, about Elena's confession before the kiss instead of after it, about 2 years of quiet architecture Elena had chosen to reveal rather than let Margot discover on her own. Yes, she said, and found she meant it completely. Then that's more than most people manage. Priya's voice went quieter. You know, Carla and I dated, back when I was still an associate and she was already partner. Before your time here. Margot's glass stopped halfway to her mouth. I didn't know that. Nobody knows that. That's the point. Priya's mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. We were careful too. We thought we were smart about it. And then somebody saw us at a restaurant across town. And by Monday, it was the only thing anyone at the old firm was talking about. And Carla made partner track, and I got quietly encouraged to lateral somewhere else before it could reflect on either of us. We never talked about it again. Not once. In 15 years. She's your senior partner now. And I still can't sit in a closing with her without feeling 19 years old. Priya looked at the scotch in her glass, rather than at Margot. I'm not telling you this to scare you off. I'm telling you because I think you should know what the version where you say nothing and let it calcify into silence actually costs. It costs 15 years and counting. Margot understood in that moment that she was looking at exactly the future she was most afraid of. Not the scandal, not the professional risk, but the quiet, permanent, unremarkable erasure of something that had mattered, folded so completely into professional silence that it left no mark anyone could name. Priya was the mirror of the choice Margot could still make wrong. She filed the conversation away with more weight than she let herself show. The complication, when it came, did not come from gossip or a restaurant sighting. It came from Carla Bianchi herself, 3 weeks later, in the form of a merger. A larger regional firm had approached Voss and Marchetti about an acquisition, the kind of deal that would fold Margot's real estate practice into a much bigger machine, with much bigger money, and much stricter, more formal HR policies than the loose, trust-based culture of a 12-person boutique firm. Carla called Margot into her office on a Tuesday morning and laid it out with the particular bluntness she reserved for conversations that mattered. "They're doing diligence on us the way we do diligence on everyone else," Carla said. "Which means, among other things, they're going to look hard at every reporting relationship in this office. Conflicts of interest, HR exposure, anything that could become a liability once we're under their compliance umbrella instead of ours. I need to know, Margot, honestly, right now, if there's anything in this office that's going to surface during that process and blow up in all of our faces." Margot sat very still. She thought about the balcony in Aspen. She thought about 6 weeks of careful doorways and lunches taken separately, and a coffee mug that still, every single morning, arrived exactly right. She thought about Priya. 15 years of silence calcified into a wound neither she nor Carla had ever spoken aloud. And she thought, with a clarity that surprised her, that she did not want to become the second half of that same story. "There's something," Margot said. "I need you to hear the whole thing before you react." She told her. Carefully, honestly, the way she would have wanted someone to tell her if their positions had been reversed, the timeline, the 6 weeks, the reporting structure, and her plan, which she constructed out loud, in real time, sitting across from Carla's desk, faster than she'd expected herself to be able to construct anything under that kind of pressure. A formal reassignment, effective immediately, moving Elena's reporting line to Priya instead of to Margot directly, with full documentation, before the merger diligence team ever laid eyes on the org chart. Carla listened without interrupting. When Margot finished, she was quiet for a long moment, and Margot watched something move behind her eyes that might have been memory. "You're telling me before it's a problem instead of after," Carla said finally. "That's not nothing, Margot. Most people wait until they're caught." "I don't want to wait until I'm caught. I don't want this to be a thing I have to defend instead of a thing I got ahead of." Carla nodded slowly. "Fix the reporting line today. Document it clean. And Margot..." She paused, and for a second, the polished, unreadable senior partner mask slipped just enough for Margot to see something underneath it. Something that looked, unmistakably, like an old and unhealed regret. "Don't let this one turn into the kind of thing you spend 15 years not talking about. Whatever it is, it's not worth what that costs." Margot did not ask how Carla knew what that cost. She thought she already understood. The reassignment went through within the week. Clean, documented, entirely unremarkable to anyone outside the 3 people who knew what it actually meant. Elena's official reporting line moved to Priya. Margot kept working with her daily, on the same matters, in the same office, but the formal liability the merger diligence team would have flagged simply ceased to exist, closed off before anyone outside the firm ever had reason to look for it. It should have felt like relief. For a few days, it did. Then, on a Thursday afternoon 3 weeks before the merger was set to close, Margot was going through old calendar entries to reconstruct a timeline for the diligence team, routine work, the kind of tedious archaeology every acquisition requires, and found something that stopped her cold. It was a calendar invite from 14 months earlier, long before the Friday night in the office. long before Aspen. An internal note attached to a scheduling request Elena had sent herself for a 4-day trip to Aspen that had never actually happened. An early draft of the same due diligence trip, proposed and then quietly withdrawn when the deal timeline shifted, more than a year before the actual trip took place. Elena had suggested, in writing, over a year in advance, that whoever went to Aspen for the eventual closing should be given a hotel with a private balcony, citing, in the notes field, better for late-night calls with opposing counsel, fewer interruptions. Margot sat with that for a long time. 14 months. Elena had been quietly positioning the shape of an opportunity that didn't yet exist. More than a year before the Friday night that Margot had always assumed was the accident that started everything. The balcony had not been a lucky coincidence of hotel inventory. It had been requested specifically, over a year in advance, for reasons that had nothing to do with call quality and everything to do with a version of hope so patient it barely resembled hope at all. It resembled, instead, a kind of quiet, long-view faith that the moment would eventually come, and that when it did, she wanted the setting ready. Margot thought about the Friday night differently now. She had always believed that a careless word had cracked something open by accident, that she was the one who'd lost control first, and Elena's say it again had simply been an honest, unplanned reaction to an unplanned moment. She understood now that the moment she'd thought was an accident had, in fact, been the culmination of 14 months of a woman quietly building the conditions under which an accident could finally be permitted to happen. Elena had not manufactured the feeling, but she had, with extraordinary patience, made sure that if the feeling ever surfaced, there would be nowhere for it to go but toward her. It should have unsettled her. For one disorienting hour, sitting alone in her office with an old calendar entry open on her screen, it did. Then it didn't, because Margot understood, with a clarity that arrived all at once, that this was not manipulation. This was the same quality she had spent 3 years admiring in every closing binder Elena had ever prepared, the capacity to see 3 steps ahead, to build the scaffolding quietly and well before anyone else knew it was needed, to care for something so thoroughly that the caring became invisible, indistinguishable from competence, until the day it finally chose to be seen. Elena had spent 14 months being patient with something Margot hadn't even known she wanted yet. That was not a woman who had tricked her into anything. That was a woman who had loved her, carefully and at a distance, for longer than Margot had let herself notice, and who had never once tried to force the timeline. Only to make sure that when the timeline arrived on its own, everything would be ready. She found Elena in the small kitchen off the main floor, refilling the blue mug with the specific ratio of coffee to oat milk that Margot had never once had to request. 14 months, Margot said, without preamble. Elena's hand stilled on the carafe. She did not ask what Margot meant. You found the old scheduling note. You requested a balcony room 14 months before the trip actually happened. I did. Elena set the carafe down carefully, like the conversation required both hands free. I told myself for a year that it was a logistics preference. I stopped believing that a long time before I stopped doing it. You've been choosing me since before I knew there was a choice to make. Yes. Elena's voice didn't waver. I wasn't going to apologize for it in Aspen, and I'm not going to apologize for it now. I made a decision, a long time ago, to be patient about something I wanted very badly, instead of doing something rash that would have cost us both our jobs before either of us was ready. I don't think that's a character flaw, Margot. I think it's the only version of this where we both still have careers and each other. Margot set the mug down and closed the distance between them, the same 8 feet that had once felt like the widest gap in the building. I thought I was the one who lost control that Friday, she said. I've spent months thinking I was the reckless one, and you were just collateral, caught in something I started by accident. You weren't reckless. You were honest, for one unguarded second, about something you'd been protecting yourself from for years. Elena reached up and touched Margot's jaw, the gesture as certain as everything else about her. I just made sure that when you finally were honest, I'd be standing close enough to hear it. For a long moment, neither of them said anything at all. The kitchen smelled like coffee, and the particular quiet of a workday winding down. And somewhere down the hall, a printer was running, and none of it mattered nearly as much as the fact that Margot Voss, who had built a decade-long wall out of the wreckage of one failed marriage, was standing in a small kitchen letting someone dismantle it, brick by patient brick, and finding that she did not want to stop her. The merger closed 6 weeks later, clean, on schedule, with an org chart that raised no flags anyone needed to worry about. Priya made a joke at the closing dinner about how remarkably well Elena had adapted to reporting to her instead of Margot, and only Carla, watching from across the table with a glass of wine she barely touched, seemed to understand exactly how much effort had gone into making that adaptation look effortless. Margot and Elena did not go public with anything, not right away, not dramatically. They simply stopped pretending, in the small private hours that belonged only to them, that any of it had ever been accidental. On a Friday night 4 months after the first one, the office empty again, the same blue mug on the same corner of the same desk, though it belonged to a different desk now, in a different corner of the same apartment they had quietly, carefully begun sharing. Margot looked up from a stack of paperwork that had nothing to do with the firm and said, without any of the exhaustion that had colored the first time, deliberately, with her eyes open, "Mommy." Elena looked up slowly. The color climbed her throat exactly the way it had the first time, except now there was nothing hidden behind it. No 14 months of careful architecture left unspoken. Nothing left to protect either of them from. "Say it again," she said, and Margot did. There's a version of every love story where the person doing the loving stays quiet forever, careful and competent and invisible, and the moment simply never arrives, where the coffee stays right, the calendar stays buffered, and nobody ever finds out how long the caring was actually running underneath the professionalism. Most of us know someone who lived that version. Some of us have been that version. The question worth sitting with isn't whether you'd have the courage to say the risky thing out loud first. It's whether you'd have the patience to keep choosing someone quietly, for 14 months or 14 years, with no guarantee the moment would ever come at all. If this story stayed with you, the way it stayed with us to write, that's exactly why the Patreon exists, for the stories too unfiltered, too much, to live anywhere else. This one had a happy ending. Not every story we tell there does, and that's the point. Hit the like button if you want more of these, subscribe if you want to be there when the next one drops, and we'll see you in the next story.